There's a reason you feel like something's off, like the rules you were taught don't apply anymore. You gave everything, your time, your loyalty, your intentions, only to be left staring at the pieces of a script that never made sense. You were told women are delicate, emotional, nurturing. You were told love is pure, that if you just tried harder, stayed honest, stayed kind, it would work. But it didn't. And somewhere deep in your gut, you've started to suspect that the entire foundation you built your hopes on was a lie. Not because women are evil, not because men are victims, but because you were never told the truth. Almost 200 years ago, Arthur Schopenhauer tried to say something that no one wanted to hear. He wasn't a pickup artist. He wasn't a YouTuber. He was a philosopher, and one of the darkest ever. He believed life itself was suffering, and that our desires, especially romantic ones, were traps designed by nature to enslave us. But when he spoke about women, people didn't just disagree, they were outraged. He saw something that most men, to this day, are punished for even thinking. He didn't say it gently. He didn't try to protect feelings. He just laid it out, raw, cold, and merciless. This isn't about hate. This is about waking up. Because behind the words that got him ridiculed lies something many men are starting to feel but can't yet articulate. That they've been misled. Not just by women, but by society, culture, and even themselves. Schopenhauer warned us. But we didn't listen. Now we're paying the price. This is not a guide. It's not advice. It's a mirror. You can look away, or you can look in and start to understand. From the moment a boy becomes aware of women, he's handed an illusion. It's not handed by accident. It's curated. Fairy tales, love songs, classroom lectures, and family advice all whisper the same thing, that women are paragons of empathy, beauty, and grace, that they complete us. And so, before a man ever speaks to a woman, he's already been conditioned to see her not as she is, but as what he's been told she should be. This is the first betrayal, and it doesn't come from her. It comes from the world around you. Schopenhauer called it out early. He saw romantic love not as a divine union, but as a manipulation by nature, a trick to keep the species reproducing. Men fall in love with an illusion, but they pay for it with their energy, their focus, sometimes their lives. And still, they call it noble. They sacrifice willingly, proudly, and blindly. Why? Because the ideal they're chasing isn't just hers. It's theirs. They've mistaken projection for reality, and by the time they realize the difference, it's often too late. You thought she was pure. You thought she was different. But the pedestal you placed her on wasn't hers. It was built from every lie you were fed. You didn't fall for her. You fell for the version of her you created in your mind. And when she didn't live up to it, you blamed her. Or worse, you blamed yourself. The truth is, idealism is a trap. It doesn't just blind you, it makes you deaf to reality. Schopenhauer warned that once you idealize, you stop seeing clearly. And once you stop seeing clearly, you hand over your power. Every illusion you hold is a chain around your neck. And the worst part? You put it there yourself. You see it in her eyes. The wide, unbothered gaze, the soft voice, the way she acts, like the world is something happening to her, not something she's influencing. It disarms you. You drop your guard. You think she couldn't possibly be calculating, because how could someone so delicate, so innocent, possibly be dangerous. That's the performance. And it works. Not because she's evil, but because you're not watching closely enough. Schopenhauer didn't mince words. He described women as instinctively deceptive, not out of malice, but because nature equipped them for survival through manipulation, not confrontation. While men fight openly, women influence quietly. Not with force, but with suggestion. Not with strength, but with subtlety. The danger isn't in her words. It's in what she doesn't say. It's not in her actions. It's in your interpretation of them. Men mistake silence for purity. They confuse softness with morality. But that's not insight. That's projection. You see what you want to see, and she lets you. That's the mask. And it's not meant to hide who she is. It's meant to show you who you wish she were. Because the moment you believe she's harmless, you lower your defenses. And once you do that, the game is over. This isn't about villainy. It's about instinct. Women aren't taught to survive by overpowering men. They survive by influencing them. Through charm, through mystery, through selective vulnerability. It's not evil. It's evolutionary. But the man who can't recognize the mask is the man who will be ruled by it. Schopenhauer saw the game centuries ago. He watched men fall, not to violence, but to illusion. The mask wasn't a disguise. It was a weapon. And the worst part? She didn't even have to sharpen it. You handed her the blade. Schopenhauer understood something men today still don't. Power doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes, it whispers in the ear of the man who does. That's the role women have played for centuries. Not the face of power, but the force behind it. And it's easy to miss, because men are obsessed with visible authority. But real influence isn't loud. It's patient. It doesn't demand. It steers. You look at history and see kings, generals, philosophers. You think it was all men at the helm. But behind those decisions, behind those crusades, behind those legacies, there was often a woman who didn't need the spotlight because she already had the strings. Schopenhauer saw that. He called it what it was: indirect rule. A soft empire built on emotional leverage and the male ego. Women learned long ago that direct confrontation doesn't serve them. So instead, they positioned themselves where men are weakest, at the center of their desire. Not because they wanted men's power, but because they wanted men to use it for them. And once a man ties his worth to a woman's approval, he becomes predictable. He'll work, fight, and even destroy himself just to keep her smiling. That's not love. That's control. Schopenhauer saw how men were turned into instruments, not because they were forced, but because they were convinced. Convinced they were leading, when they were really following. Convinced they were protecting, when they were being used. And every time they ignored that soft voice shaping their choices, they thought they were free. But freedom isn't doing what you want when someone else gave you the reasons. That's not leadership. It's manipulation in disguise. And Schopenhauer knew the most dangerous power isn't the one you fear. It's the one you trust. Schopenhauer didn't just question women's nature. He dissected it. And one of the most brutal observations he made was this: women, he said, are children of a different kind. Not in years, but in mind. Not because they lack intelligence, but because their entire world revolves around the immediate, the now, the emotional weather of the moment. While men are burdened with long-term thinking, strategy, legacy, consequence, women, he argued, are built for the fleeting. To Schopenhauer, this wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. He saw that women never really leave the realm of childhood because their power lies in their vulnerability. In youth, it's cuteness. In adulthood, it becomes charm, neediness, and emotional sway. These tools don't evolve because they don't have to. The world rewards them. Men reinforce them. And so the cycle continues. He believed that women's connection to deeper truth was always filtered through their feelings. That's why logic frustrates them. Not because they can't grasp it, but because it threatens the system they thrive in. A system where emotion trumps evidence, where tears can stop a war, where mood becomes moral law. And men, trying to reason with that, often find themselves trapped, debating with a moving target. Schopenhauer didn't hate women. He pitied the man who misunderstood them. He saw that when a man expects a partner who thinks like him, he's preparing himself for betrayal. Not because she's cruel, but because she's different. Fundamentally, this isn't about superiority. It's about survival strategies. Men look to the future to conquer it. Women live in the present to master it. But when a man binds himself to someone who can't, or won't, carry the same psychological weight, he's not finding balance. He's taking on a dependent, and no kingdom survives when the king becomes the caretaker. Schopenhauer didn't just question women's temperament, he questioned their morality. Not because he believed women were evil, but because he saw that their concept of good and bad wasn't tied to principle. It was tethered to preference. To him, morality in women wasn't a structure built on reason or justice. It was a costume stitched from convenience, worn when it fit, discarded when it didn't. He noticed that women's sense of right and wrong often adjusted based on how they felt about a person or a situation. If they liked someone, excuses flowed. If they didn't, judgment came fast and final. It wasn't hypocrisy in the traditional sense. It was emotional morality. A code built not on fairness, but on loyalty, feelings, and power. Schopenhauer saw this not as a defect, but as a function. Women were not designed, he argued, for impartial judgment. They were designed for family survival. In that game, morality becomes flexible. It bends to protect what's close and destroy what's threatening. It's not justice, it's instinct dressed up as virtue. This is why, he claimed, women are often seen as nurturing yet ruthless, loving to those they care about, merciless to those they don't. The same woman who can cradle a child can destroy a man without guilt, if she feels it serves her or her offspring. And society rarely calls her out, because her actions are veiled in empathy, framed as reaction, not choice. Schopenhauer's warning wasn't about paranoia. It was about understanding. A man who mistakes emotional morality for ethical stability will find himself manipulated by someone who can justify anything through the lens of her feelings. She won't see herself as wrong, only hurt. And in her pain, every betrayal becomes self-defense. Every lie becomes survival. Every destruction becomes deserved. Schopenhauer saw through one of the most paradoxical forces in human nature, the power of weakness. Not physical power, not political power, but the subtle, invisible dominance that comes from appearing defenseless. He believed that women had mastered this art, not through conscious strategy, but through centuries of evolution. In a world that rewards strength, It's easy to miss the quiet control of those who pretend not to have any. To Schopenhauer, the appearance of fragility wasn't a flaw, it was a weapon. A woman did not need to demand power. She only needed to suggest vulnerability. Her tears were more potent than a man's threats. Her silence more unsettling than any scream. Where a man must assert, a woman simply allows others to act on her behalf. And the irony is that the more helpless she seems, the more control she gains. He observed that men, driven by instinct and idealism, often fell into this trap. They rushed to rescue, to protect, to serve. Not because they were weak, but because they were wired to respond. A woman's display of weakness, whether real or feigned, activated the savior impulse in men, one that could be redirected, reshaped, even exploited. This wasn't manipulation in the typical sense. It was instinctual theater, perfected over generations. When society told women they were powerless, they learned to rule from the shadows. When they were excluded from the sword, they mastered the shield. And when they were denied authority, they found influence in sympathy, seduction, and surrender. Schopenhauer didn't blame women for this. He saw it as nature's balance. But he warned men, never confuse softness with submission. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. And the one who appears to need saving might already be steering the ship through your hands, not hers. Schopenhauer had no illusions about society's moral theater. He believed that the so-called moral superiority, often attributed to women, was a carefully woven illusion, one society not only tolerated, but celebrated. In his eyes, morality was not a constant truth, but a tool, and women, more than anyone else, had learned how to wear it like a mask. He argued that morality, when filtered through sentiment, becomes selective. Women, guided by emotion rather than logic, often judged right and wrong based not on principles, but on feelings. A deed was not good because it aligned with a universal truth, but because it felt right in the moment. And that moment was fleeting, vulnerable to desire, fear, and self-interest. To Schopenhauer, this meant women could justify contradictions without even realizing it. They could betray with a clear conscience, deceive while believing in their own innocence, and destroy while claiming to protect. The mask of morality didn't conceal evil intent. It made it invisible, even to the wearer. Because when you're convinced your actions come from love, guilt never arrives. He warned that men, taught to see women as the moral compass of civilization, often bowed to this illusion. They mistook instinct for wisdom, emotion for virtue. And once that mask was accepted as truth, it granted immunity. Criticism became cruelty, doubt became misogyny, and the game continued. Schopenhauer didn't deny that men could be immoral, but he pointed out that their sins were often brutal, obvious, and punishable. Women's misdeeds, cloaked in charm and justified by emotion, were harder to detect and even harder to condemn. The tragedy, he said, is not that women wear masks. It's that men keep pretending they don't. And in that blindness, morality itself begins to rot, sweetened by smiles and shielded by sentiment. Schopenhauer observed something few dared to admit: society's obsession with the image of the eternal girl, not the woman of wisdom, but the woman untouched by age, complexity, or self-awareness. He believed this fixation didn't arise from reverence, but from fear, a fear of the mature woman, the one who sees through illusions and no longer plays by the script. To him, the idealization of youth in women was a form of control. It rewarded appearance over substance, flirtation over insight, obedience over understanding. A young woman, still entangled in vanity and romance, was more pliable, more dependent, more manageable. And so, men, and culture at large, praised her not for who she was, but for how long she could delay becoming anything more. This arrested development became not only expected, but demanded. Women learned to perform youth like a role, clinging to giggles, tantrums, and wide-eyed innocence long past the age of reason. Schopenhauer saw it as tragic, not because youth was cherished, but because womanhood itself was quietly vilified. He noted how, in literature and life, the girl is always the prize, while the older woman becomes either invisible or ridiculed. The girl is the muse, the fantasy, the excuse for risk. The woman is the mirror men turn away from, the one who knows too much and smiles too little. Schopenhauer wasn't romanticizing age. He was mourning what was lost in this fixation. When depth is buried beneath cosmetics, and wisdom is outshined by naivety, everyone suffers. Women are trapped in performances. Men fall in love with characters, not people. And maturity, which should be honored, is treated like a flaw. He warned that a civilization that fears mature femininity will never grow up itself. It will forever chase illusions and find only emptiness when the curtain falls. Schopenhauer understood something deeply uncomfortable about relationships. They were rarely just about love. Behind every whispered promise, behind every glance across a candlelit table, there often sat a silent negotiator, economics. And he didn't mean money in the crude sense, but value, leverage, transaction. Seduction, he argued, was not purely about desire. It was about strategy. A woman's beauty, in his view, became a currency. It was advertised, appraised, and exchanged, usually not for love, but for security, status, or comfort. Men, driven by instinct and fantasy, often failed to see the structure beneath the charm. They believed they were winning a heart. Often, they were buying a role in someone else's plan. Schopenhauer wasn't blaming women. He was indicting the system that made this necessary. In a world where women had few paths to autonomy, beauty became their capital. Seduction became survival. He saw this as a quiet war, not of guns, but of glances and gestures. One side played with sincerity, the other with calculation. Not out of malice, but because that's how the rules were written. And once seduction entered the room, truth quietly left. Relationships stopped being unions and became bargains. Love distorted into leverage. Even more damning, Schopenhauer believed this dynamic didn't end at marriage, it deepened. The man, having traded, began to pay. He worked, sacrificed, submitted, not to build something mutual, but to maintain the illusion. The woman, now secured, wielded power not through tenderness, but entitlement. Intimacy turned into obligation. Passion became policy. This wasn't bitterness, it was diagnosis. Schopenhauer believed that as long as desire could be weaponized, love would remain corrupted. Until men saw the architecture of seduction for what it was, a machine masked as magic, they would continue walking into traps, smiling, never realizing they were already sold. Schopenhauer was ruthless when it came to cultural delusions. and perhaps none irritated him more than the carefully preserved myth of female innocence. To him, it wasn't just false, it was dangerous. This idealized image of the pure, gentle, morally superior woman wasn't born of observation, but of convenience. Men needed to believe it, society demanded it, but reality never supported it. He argued that women were not inherently more virtuous than men. They were simply trained to present themselves that way. From a young age, girls were taught the art of appearance, how to smile without feeling, how to soften language, how to conceal intention behind a mask of passivity. Society applauded these performances as virtue, but Schopenhauer saw them as camouflage. In private, behind the veil of etiquette, he believed women wielded their own form of power, subtle, psychological, and often more ruthless than the brute strength of men. If a man used force, a woman used guilt. If he made threats, she cried. Where he pushed, she withdrew. She didn't need to fight. She only had to manipulate. And the worst part? Most men had no idea they were being moved. They thought they were in charge. They weren't even on the board. Schopenhauer wasn't accusing women of being evil. He was accusing society of lying, of dressing strategy as sincerity, of turning weakness into a weapon, and of calling it feminine grace. The myth of innocence protected women from accountability and blinded men to danger. It allowed one gender to act while the other apologized. This wasn't about hate. It was about warning. As long as men continued to chase ideals instead of individuals, they would never see what stood before them. They'd keep falling for illusions, then calling it betrayal when reality finally answered back. When Schopenhauer spoke, few listened. When he died, most forgot. And when the world evolved into something louder, faster, more self-assured, his warnings were buried under the noise. But silence doesn't mean safety. It just means we stopped asking the right questions. The tragedy wasn't that he was controversial. It was that he was dismissed, brushed off as bitter, labeled as outdated. Yet with each passing decade, his observations have grown more haunting, not less. He described a cultural shift before it happened. He predicted the imbalance before anyone named it. And he saw through the performance before the stage was even set. In today's world, relationships are collapsing under the weight of expectations no one can meet. Men wander confused, unsure of their place, afraid to lead, punished if they follow. Women push for more, but often find less. The language of love has become transactional, scripted, and tired. And what Schopenhauer warned has crept in through the back door. The commodification of intimacy, the rise of strategic affection, the loss of honest polarity between the sexes. But there's a reason his work has resurfaced, a reason his name is whispered again in digital corners and late-night podcasts. Because underneath the cynicism was something rare. Clarity. He didn't pander. He didn't flatter. He simply looked and said what others refused to. And that kind of voice doesn't stay buried forever. We don't have to agree with him, but to ignore him would be to repeat the mistake his own century made. A mistake that echoes in the modern man's confusion and the modern woman's discontent. Schopenhauer wasn't just warning men about women. He was warning both about the mirror, about what we become when we lie to ourselves long enough and call it progress.